Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Live. As Nani just posted, we are having a little technical challenge. I don't know if it's because of the weather or what the story is, but we are still here with you tonight. I do have Terri Trent, who's our guest tonight. Let me just give you a little bit of her background while she's getting things squared away. So, Terri, in addition to being a coach and a consultant, and she has been one of our fearless coaches for many years, she's one of our affiliates. She's also a faculty development specialist at Wilmington University. And she's got a host of experience with leadership development, with managing and coaching people, with career coaching, and a million other things in between. She's also a PhD, so she's the kind of person who has the resilience and the grittiness of getting through a very rigorous academic schedule. And she's an author of several books. The one that I read most recently is The Space Beyond Fear. And I cannot wait to share her with you. I know for sure we're going to get her by audio. I might think that we may only get to see her beautiful face if she FaceTimes me, and then I can share you with her. So let me see if I can try to get her connected. So Terri, if you can hear me, it just says that here we go, that you need to add your
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah. The wonders of technology. We love it. We can't live without it. And yet, when it fails us, it does put us in a pickle. Just to let the audience know, I've been trying to sign on by way of two different laptops. One successfully connected the audio, the other connected my picture, but we didn't get both. So we apologize for that, but we're going to press on anyway because we
Yes.
appreciate you all being with us this evening, and we're excited to talk to you about issues of diversity and inclusion.
Yes. Excellent. And this is what my lovely esteemed colleague Terri looks like. She's just gorgeous. So you'll get to see her next time. But we get to hear her wisdom and this whole this idea about polarities. You called this negotiating polarities, learning to dialogue about differences. So tell us, like, what does that even mean, polarities?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, before I define polarities, I just want to take a moment and pay homage to John Lewis. On last Friday, July the 17th, our nation lost a hero. There he is. He is the man long known as the moral conscience of Congress. He succumbed to pancreatic cancer at the age of 80. But he lived a tremendous life. He served in Congress for 34 years, and his life was a sermon in and of itself. Starting at the tender age of 17, he started fighting for nonviolent change, for civil rights and voting booths and public accommodations, housing, education, and equity and employment. He led numerous freedom rides through the South and was repeatedly beat. He nearly lost his life following the protest on Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge as he led thousands across the bridge in a freedom march in Montgomery, Alabama. He was the youngest speaker and organizer of the 1963 March on Washington and was the last survivor of the Big Six speakers who addressed the nation on that date in 1963, along with Martin Luther King Jr. Lewis was a North Star for peace, justice, and genuine love of mankind. With humility and compassion, he believed that positive change can happen if we're willing to embrace a mindset of inclusiveness and positive change. His death and legacy really sets the context for our conversation this evening. He really encouraged all conscientious citizens to get involved in what he called good trouble. So tonight we're going to share some strategies with you about getting in good trouble. So in tribute to and in honor of the civil rights icon, I want to share with you some strategies for navigating the polarities of life. or the polarities of change.
Mm.
So to your first question, that was a long-winded
A
introduction, but
beautiful intro. Thank you, Terri.
yeah, so what do we mean by the term polarity, and what's the relationship to the protests and the corresponding demands for justice? Well, quite literally, a polarity describes the state of having opposing or contradictory viewpoints, opposing or contradictory beliefs, opposing or contradictory positions. Now, today, we're experiencing polarities in just about every aspect of modern life. On the one hand, there are individuals who care about preserving life and health. They're battling the individuals who refuse to follow health professionals and government's mandates to wear masks in public.
Mm-hmm.
Supporters of Black Lives Matter are protesting to bring an end to police violence, ensure equity. And on the other hand, many individuals are fighting to maintain vestiges of history and the status quo. These individuals are on polar opposites. And I'm sorry you can't see me because I want to visually show you what that looks like. But the reality is that these seemingly opposing forces in a system are both needed to maintain balance in a diverse, independent, and democratic society. Well, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that we're all wired differently, and we are all imbued with certain inalienable rights, rights of belief, and the pursuit of happiness. We're not clones.
Right.
We're all made differently. Yep. So we have the freedom to have diverse beliefs. And our challenge is really to learn how to navigate these polarities or differences in a way that demonstrates respect for our fellow citizens, while at the same time extending empathy and compassion for those differences.
That is so true, Terri. And I hope you're going to give us some practical strategies for how to have that dialogue, because I think that is such an important thing right now, is to recognize that we are on different sides of the spectrum sometimes. And I like how you said that balances it out, and how important it is for us to engage with courage into those conversations with others on the opposite side of the spectrum where we find ourselves, so that we can, really round out our thinking, not necessarily change our point of view. I don't know that that's possible in some of these situations where people have very clear perspectives, but really to educate and understand how another could see the same exact thing.
Yeah, and Shannon, I would say that we not only want to educate people, but we want to build community with people with differences. We don't get to pick our neighbors necessarily. We certainly don't get to pick our family members, our blood family members. And yet, even within families, there are gross distinctions, divisions in terms of our thinking, our political views, et cetera, our views on race. And so it's really important that we be able to dialogue with one another and come to a space of common ground. And unfortunately, today, people are really reluctant to do that, and they are having difficulty finding common ground with their neighbors and with their family members.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It is really challenging. Oh, I just zoomed in on myself.
So if you'd like, we can talk a little bit about the book, because you suggested that the book is a great springboard for this conversation really around differences.
Yeah.
So
tell me about what you wrote this, 4 years ago?
Yeah. The book was actually published early in 2017, and it's a work of fiction, but as is the case with a lot of fiction, it's a case of art mirroring life. And Shannon, sharing with you the cover, and if you look very closely, you can see that even in the cover photo, there's a lot going on there. There's a police line, which is shown through the reflection of our main character, Kingston Jones. So there's a crime scene. There are police lights in the background, and what may not be immediately visible is a single tear streaming down Kingston's face. And then Shannon, if you can hold it up just a little bit, You can see that he's dressed in business attire, but yet his tie is adorned with chains. And that's to illustrate the fact that he feels enslaved, he feels trapped, despite his professional accomplishments. So, again, our protagonist in the book is Kingston Jones. He's an African American marketing professional who, on the surface, appears to epitomize success. But in reality, he's weighed down with several secrets. Despite his professional accomplishments and his pedigree as an alum of an Ivy League university, he's physically abused following a routine traffic stop late one night en route home. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
So the book explores the tension that exists in the intersectionality in the disparate parts of Kingston's life. Also in the disparate parts of our lives, because we are many things. Kingston, as I mentioned, is a token African American in a leadership role in his marketing firm. He is the only son of an abusive single mother. He has some ambiguity and confusion navigating his sexual orientation. So the book tries to shed some light behind the veil of somebody who shows up one way in public, but is heavily burdened by several masks, wearing several masks.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to shift and talk about this notion of mask wearing, or should I pause right there?
No, I just wanted to share more clearly that visual, because I love this. I really think that the book cover gives us a lot about what this book is about. So here, that's better than me holding it up. And so you see exactly the things that Terri talked about, and there's even some imagery in his glasses that you may end up talking about. And that even though he appeared to be this model citizen, exactly like Terri said, he feels like he's enslaved. And I think that mask wearing is something really important for us to talk about now and always. Like, what is that? Why do people do that? And then what does it take away from your authentic expression, for one, but even your overall joy and happiness in life? So tell us a little bit more about masks, Terri.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you can access the PowerPoint, but I've got a couple of visuals regarding masks. So the notion of wearing masks certainly is not unique to African Americans or African American professionals in the workplace. We humans all wear masks, depending on the role that we are. There we go. And I think that the second slide focuses in on masks. Yeah. We all wear them depending on our roles within our family, our roles at work, our roles in interacting with different aspects of the community. And some of the reasons that we wear masks, in the case of Kingston, it's because he's wearing several masks of fear. He is also wearing a mask that helps him to cope with living in a hostile world in which he feels like an outsider. He's looking for a space where he can be himself, but he finds that he can't be himself in any of those environments. In fact, in one of the, I don't have the book in front of me, but in one of his interactions with his senior leadership team, the team is watching a video, and there's a news clip, and there's a protest. At the time, it was the 1-year anniversary of Michael Brown's death. And there were several people holding Black Lives Matter signs. And so his senior leader, his CEO, looks directly at him and says, "Why don't all lives matter? What's the deal with Black Lives Matter? And why don't all lives matter?" And almost in a knee-jerk response, Kingston says, "I don't know. I don't get it either. I've been asking myself the same question." But immediately after he put that statement in the universe, he was tormented. And he really wrestles with the fact that he can't share he didn't feel equipped to share his authentic self and provide an explanation. And that explanation is that when we as a society begin to value Black lives, then all lives will matter. Right. It's like the analogy of, and I've heard many people cite this recently, it's the neighborhood with the house on fire. And the people, as the fire truck goes down the street, people are waving, saying, "Wait, throw water on my house."
Yeah.
And the fireman shouts back and says, "But your house is not on fire."
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people often don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so going back to this idea of masking, we all wear masks. We all do what's called code switching, depending on the environment that we're in. But these are important questions to ask yourself, because quite frankly, and we're going to talk about being reflective in just a moment, but it's important to reflect on, what are your masks? Because sometimes we don't even know that we're wearing them.
Right. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, and you reference that quite a lot in this book. Like, you get to see Kingston from the two angles of how you imagine his colleagues see him, and they're envious of him because he's so successful and he's well liked and he's handsome, and he's got all of those great qualities that are attractive to people. And then you get to learn about what's going on inside of him, and that moment that you just brought up about watching the news clip, and like how all the eyes were at him and they felt like they were piercing through him, and he made that innocuous statement to just get the eyes off of him, but then he was so ashamed of himself. Like, why didn't I speak up and be willing? Exactly this topic tonight that we're talking about, that willingness to, even though I'm experiencing a polarity or perhaps a lack of education or understanding, what's preventing me from speaking up?
Yeah, exactly. And so in the story, much of the tension focuses on Kingston and his nemesis, Officer Powell. And that's the police officer who stops him for the traffic violation. And things go left, way left, and he ends up being beat to a pulp. And so on the surface, it would appear that he and Officer Powell share nothing in common. And when I wrote the book, even though this is a work of fiction, I did quite a bit of research. I talked to people who are in law enforcement. I talked to people from law enforcement families, and they've shared some of the secrets, if you will, that their families talk about behind closed doors, so to speak.
Sure.
And what I think is beneath the surface here is that although their backgrounds are quite different, and it's ironic, but despite their seeming polarities, these two men share a secret in common, because it turns out that they've both been victims of childhood sexual molestation. And so the way that they choose to respond to that are very different. Officer Powell acts out in violence because he's had numerous citations of acting out violently. But just as we see in the case of Mr. Floyd, the officer who killed him also had a number of violations, but they were swept under the rug. He kept his job. Nobody addressed it. And likewise, such was the case with Officer Powell.
Yeah.
So, and again, I wrote this 4 years ago. So obviously these things they don't happen in isolation. We're just learning about them.
Yeah.
But the challenge for Kingston is really, and this is where the title comes from, the small space beyond fear. It's the still small voice of authenticity and of courage that lives within each of us.
Yeah.
So if you'll go back to that previous slide, no, fast forward, the next one.
Oh, this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Why do we wear them?
Yeah. So these are the prevalent reasons why people typically wear masks. In Kingston's case, he was wearing them to fit in at work, to fit in his relationship, his loving relationship, his relationship with his mother. Also, we wear masks in an effort to overcome fear. But ironically, sometimes wearing the mask just serves to solidify that fear or intensify that fear.
Yeah.
Sometimes a mask is used as an outlet for rage, and such was the case with Kingston's nemesis, Officer Powell. He was acting out with rage. And yet there are other reasons for wearing masks. Sometimes we wear the masks because we're simply not aware that we have a mask on, or and I guess it goes back to fear.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
wear masks out of fear. So let's shift the conversation a little bit, because I talked about the book, who is an African American protagonist, but tonight really our conversation is more geared to the notion of allies. How do we
Mm-hmm.
build allyship, right?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you turn allyship into advocacy? So
Mm-hmm.
that other slide was good, actually, for the transition.
Yeah, this is great.
And so the question, I think, that begs, and I'll share with you, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been hearing from colleagues from across the country. As you know, Shannon, I spent 10 years in the Southwest in Phoenix, and so
Yep.
I have a number of friends and colleagues out in that area. And I've heard from a number of colleagues who have asked me, how are you holding
Mm-hmm.
the violence, the events between the self isolation due to COVID, and just the social justice issues that have
Sure.
permeated every aspect of our lives. How are you holding this? And so I've started thinking about this a lot. Um, what can specifically well-meaning white folks do to help the social justice cause?
Yeah.
Because what would really be a crime would be for weeks from now, months from now, all of the protesting to stop and there be no next step, there to be no accountability, there to be no direction for all of these folks who have energy and presumably motivation
Mm-hmm.
to really act and do something. What's next?
Yep.
And last week, I listened to your tape from last week, and you had Jennifer Green on, and she really talked about, she did a wonderful job of identifying external resources
Sure.
and things that people can do within their communities in terms of establishing mentorship, joining organizations, making contributions to NAACP, Color of Change, educating themselves by way of podcasts and movies and books. And I thought, well, that was just a wonderful education.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flip the script, if you don't mind, and we're going to take a look inside. We're going to do
Sure.
some introspection. And I want to share with you three basic recommendations for folks who are wondering what they can do. And by the way, we're talking to the folks whose hearts have been pricked, whose mindsets have been opened and expanded. And I want each of you to examine the mask that you're currently wearing. Your knee-jerk response might be to say, well, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm authentic. I'm a liberal person. I care about my neighbor, and I don't willingly practice racism or discrimination. So I'm going to ask you to pause, challenge some of your assumptions, and we're going to take it back to Greek philosopher Socrates, who said that an unexamined life is not worth living. So in other words, before you can even attempt to be courageous in your dealings with other people, you've got to begin with self-examination, self-reflection, and a conscious awareness of your thinking.
Yeah.
So we all have unconscious biases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Quite frankly, biases are an inherent part of human development. This is how we learn to discern what we like and what we don't like, what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
We all have biases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue is, pardon me, that our decisions are based on assumptions that we make. And many of those assumptions are made in the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to begin to check your thoughts.
Yeah.
there's this notion of in academia we talk about metacognition, and it's a $10 word for thinking about the way we think.
Yeah.
So being conscious about the way we think.
Yeah.
Bring your thoughts into your conscious mind. Why do you believe what you believe? Because your thoughts become your belief system. And your belief system is translated into action. And we all know that actions performed repeatedly become habits. And then those habits influence our destiny.
Yep. Yeah, so it really starts with examining your beliefs.
Examine your beliefs and challenge some of the assumptions. Now, some of the things we do them out of habit. And if we were to examine them, we could probably take those practices back to childhood and say, well, this is how my parents taught me.
Yeah.
You know, this is how people in my family behave. This is how everybody in my neighborhood behave. This is all I've ever seen. And so now you're asking me to think about that. Yeah, I am. Challenge whether or not it's true and correct and it's appropriate for the present time.
Yeah, an analogy to that, Terri, is I heard somebody share a story about a woman was teaching her daughter and son how to make a roast. And she said, first you chop off this end and then you chop off this end and then you put it in the oven for X amount of hours and then you season it this way and da-da. So those two children move on in their lives. You know, they're now have families of their own and they're teaching their children how to make this roast. And they say, you chop off this end, you chop off this end. And so, you know, after a while, one of their children said, well, why do you chop the ends off? And the parent said, I'm not sure. So they went back to the mother and said, hey, you know, when you taught us how to make that roast, you taught us to chop the ends off both sides. You know, why is that? And she said, well, because the pan I had at that time was too small for me to get the full roast in there. So I just chopped them off. So here they are, you know, years later, still doing the same practice, but no one questioned, like, what is the reason why I do this thing? And I just assumed it was the only way it could be done. So I think it's a helpful thing for us to remember now as we're going through this moment of time, hopefully, where we're growing more, we're learning, we're extending our thoughts, to take your advice and say, okay, if we're going to take this all the way back to beliefs, what are some of the beliefs I have? Where did that come from? Is this helpful to the kind of person that I really want to be? Or is this just cutting off the ends of a roast and I don't know why?
Yeah. And if I could add to that, it's not just is it helpful to me, but does it promote goodwill across society?
Yeah.
Is it helpful to others?
Absolutely.
Are people suffering by me acting on my privilege? Because that's exactly what we're talking about. We haven't mentioned we haven't called out the P word by name, but that's exactly what it is. When we act in an automatic fashion, particularly, and I'm talking here about white folks. So think about why you think the way you do and the decision, your belief system, because some of the thought process comes out of being in a position of privilege. So here are some of the questions you can begin to ask yourself. Are you bothered by criticism? Does criticism bother you? And I want to share a situation. As I said, I've had so many conversations with people, both socially and in workplace settings and through consulting engagements. And I want to share what a colleague shared recently with a group of us. She said, you know, I did not realize how racist my family was until the past 3 or 4 months. And one of my nieces started posting racist comments online, and I challenged them, and several family members came back at me and criticized me. And that's why I don't say, she says, and that's why I don't say anything, because I don't want to be involved in conflict, and I don't want my family members to be angry with me. So what we're talking about here requires courage, and I'll get to courage in a minute. But ask yourself that question. Are you bothered by criticism? Do you fear the criticism of others?
And Terry, what would you say? I know you have more to say about that, but like, what would you say that is an indication of? Let's just say we're being honest and we say, yes, I am bothered by the criticism of others. What does that inform you about me if I said that that's true?
Well, I'm not a psychologist. So I'm not going to
Yeah.
practice armchair psychology. I
Yep.
would say that many humans, um, we fear or we shun criticism. Typically, people who are conflict averse
Mm-hmm.
don't engage criticism. And I
Yeah.
don't know if that's where you were going there. Is that
Yeah.
where you
No,
were
I'm just
thinking?
curious because you're just so wise and you've coached so many people and you're not registered a therapist, but you really have studied the human dynamic for most of your professional life. So I think, yeah, what you're saying is that fear of being excluded, right? The wanting to fit in, the also that cowardice of not wanting to have to be the one to bring up an
Yeah,
alternative point of
yeah.
view. Yeah.
You know what it is too. I think a lot of us we desire homeostasis,
Mm-hmm.
another $10 word for sameness. We believe that we humans have a false sense of control over our environment, right? And so it's so difficult for us to, for many of us, because some of us are change agents, we absolutely embrace change, but for many of us, we have a false sense of control
Mm-hmm.
over familiarity.
Yep.
And so to be a change agent and initiate any sort of change, right, particularly
Mm-hmm.
within the family dynamic or the social circle dynamic, you know that once you stick your toe in the water, you can't come back and be the same.
Yep.
And so, I love William Bridges' model, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of this, but he's got a transition model, which
Mm-hmm.
is very simple. On the left hand, there's a circle that says endings, and
Mm-hmm.
it's typically depicted in red, the red stop sign,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that my life as I knew it is over. I can't go back
Yeah.
to it anymore. And then
Yeah.
on the opposing sign, there's a green circle that says new beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue or the challenge for the average bear is, how do I leap from endings to new beginnings?
Yes.
And the reality is, you can't get there without turmoil. There's a place in between called the neutral zone.
Right.
And that zone is anything but neutral. It's scary, it's turbulent, because you don't know what the future looks like. You know
Mm-hmm.
what you've just left, but what you've just left doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
You've got to go to those new beginnings, and it means stepping out in faith. It means being well prepared. It means having the confidence to know that there's something positive up ahead,
Mm-hmm.
even if you can't see it. Now,
Yes.
those of us who are believers, we know where that comes from. It
Mm-hmm.
comes from a faith in the Almighty.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And you can
So,
trust in that faith. And if you are not a person of faith, however you um, get motivation or inspiration to go to that next place, that next phase, and manage that in between. I think, like, even right now, in so many ways, we're in this land between, where we were, life as we knew it back in the beginning of March, and life that is ahead of us. So we're in this really uncomfortable,
yeah,
uncertain time. So I love what you're saying, and I think it even goes back to the beliefs idea, which is that it's worth the discomfort to get to that next place, but you've got to go through that transitional period.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So having those uncomfortable conversations and managing this polarity, and also having the willingness to take off the mask, right? Those are some of the things that we could do.
And
It
be
sounds like,
vulnerable.
yeah,
Yeah,
be
yeah,
vulnerable, be authentic, and know that we're going to end up in a better place if we are willing to do the work. But sometimes
yeah,
it's just, I think some reasons why people stay in that first spot is that it's comfortable, it's easier, it
yeah.
seems easier. It's not. You and I both know that it won't enable change. But I think the temptation is to procrastinate and not have to deal with that discomfort.
Yeah, but here's the news flash. We're all living in a pandemic. And for all of the talk about, I can't wait for things to go back to the way they used to be, they're not going back.
Yeah.
Life as we know it has forever changed.
Yeah.
So we've got to embrace a new reality of living. So what
Mm-hmm.
I'm suggesting is that being an ally and or an advocate
Yeah.
also requires that we embrace change
Mm-hmm.
and that we step into the unknown. So
Yeah.
yeah, so the first question is, does criticism bother you?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, think about if the notion of being in conflict bothers you. I'm not talking about a physical conflict, but I'm talking about your your default style of
Mm-hmm.
handling disagreements.
Right.
Um, Thomas Killman, he's done research on conflict handling styles, and I often cite him because I think it summarizes um, the way that we humans respond to conflict. We're either competitive, we fight to the death, we love to argue, we love to be right, and we will be right at any cost. That's the competitive nature. The avoider, which is the polar opposite, I will avoid a conflict at any cost, and I'll
Yeah.
go along with what I believe is wrong just to avoid a conflict. And I think that's a style that we just talked about a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
The third is accommodation. And the accommodationist, I'm always reminded of Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. Um, the accommodationist says, "Yeah, I've got my feelings, my position about what's right, what's wrong, but um, I will give in to your best interests because the relationship trumps me exercising my own opinion." So
Uh,
that's the accommodationist.
right.
And then you've got compromise and collaboration.
Mm.
Compromise, and these two are very similar, but compromise, we see this in union negotiations. I'll give you this if you give me that. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
trade off involved.
Yeah.
But collaboration says that we are going to discuss, dialogue, debate all night if we need to. But at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, I'm going to be able to represent your position, and you likewise are going to respect and be able to represent my position.
Yeah. 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 That's, I mean, you and I are both mediators and conflict resolution students, and I think that's such an important thing to remind everyone is that when you have that polarity, to have the conversation, be willing to go through all that ugliness, even if it takes all night, to not necessarily get everybody to one side, but to be so aware of what is that alternative point of view, why do they believe that, have like a really healthy exchange. So are you suggesting that we aim to be more collaborative?
Generally speaking, yes. I think
Okay.
that's the optimal style, but it's collaboration is not always feasible. Collaboration takes time. And so I think we've got to be able to pick our battles and know when it's most appropriate to collaborate versus compromise. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are times when avoidance is appropriate. If the building is on fire, having a lengthy discussion about the best way to exit the building is not appropriate,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because it takes
Absolutely.
too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and in
so
terms of these polarities, and I know you have more to share, but I do want to get your opinion on this, because I recently just got a text from a group of my friends, and it was going back and forth, and it was basically, I have a dear friend who has a different point of view on a lot of things, Black Lives Matter being one of them, and she wants to end the relationship. She doesn't want to maintain the relationship, but her kids are friends with the other person's kids, and she said, "How do I handle this?" And many of us were suggesting that she have more dialogue and you express your point of view, a lot of the things that you're recommending tonight. And she said, I've tried that, and I've tried to open up this conversation. I've tried to be more like understanding and expressing my point of view, and doesn't feel like this person is open. So is it like with the Killman model? Is it like you aim for collaboration, and then at some point you might choose avoidance to just say like we're gonna agree to disagree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Know when to say when.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because
Because
you go
frankly,
in it with the best intent to hope and grow and engage, but that's not always met with receptivity. What were you gonna say?
exactly.
Yeah.
And you want to invest your energy where there's going to be a positive payoff. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
spin your wheels. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked about criticism. Does criticism bother you? And if so, why? Does conflict bother you? And then ask yourself, what conversations are you actively avoiding, right? Because the end goal, of course, is to have courageous conversations. And then I would say, in the light of our current landscape, what contribution do you want to make? Be clear about, what do you want the outcome to be? Do you want the outcome to be to have a greater understanding of what it's like to walk in the shoes of a person of color? Do you want to be able to have courageous conversations in your own community about people who are different than you? And I want to hang a nail on that thought right there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sure.
done a lot of training and coaching through the years. And one of the discoveries that I made is that some conversations can only be had by people who are a part of the same cultural background.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a colleague and I were facilitating, he's a white male. We were facilitating a group, and we were talking about the elephant in the room, which is the current landscape that we're living in. And there was a person having a sidebar with him only via chat, saying, "Do we really need to talk about this? This is not what I signed up for," etc. And what I learned from that, once I calmed down, was to recognize that not everybody has credibility with everybody else, and it's important that we who have influence within our circles be courageous enough to be the voice of reason within that circle, because
Mm-hmm.
what they will hear from you, Shannon, they will not hear from me. I won't have that same credibility.
Yeah, and likewise, right? Yeah, I agree, and I think that isn't that also a definition of privilege?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's influence. It's do you have the credibility? Will people listen to you? Yeah, I think
That's a great transition to my
yeah.
second recommendation, and that is to reflect on your power relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to speak in terms of power up and power down. Start to recognize, under what circumstances do you have a one up on other people. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's in a meeting as you're presenting. Do people um, hold you in higher esteem? Do you have more influence? Are you an unofficial champion or decision maker?
Mm-hmm.
Start to recognize where you have privilege. And then answer the question, why am I in a one up position? And how do I respond when I'm in a one up position? Do I respond differently when the power shifts?
Mm-hmm.
So, under what circumstances do I have a one down position? And how do I feel about being in a one down position? Um, Another scenario which happened recently was a colleague was sharing that he and his wife were invited to a party, and they didn't realize until they got to the party that they were the only white people there. And initially they were very self-conscious because they had never been in any setting in which they were the only white people there. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, after we finally got over ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and we really started enjoying ourselves and having a good time, they were great people. It was a great party. It was
Mm-hmm.
lots of fun.
Yeah.
But I had to get past my perception of moving from a one up position to a one down position.
Mm-hmm.
And my response was, well, welcome to my world, because frankly, that's a one down position is how African Americans and other people of color often find themselves in social settings, in professional settings, living in America
Yeah.
generally.
So in terms of allyship, Terri, when people identify that they are in the one-up position, what allyship behavior do you recommend? Like, say you're the one-up, and you recognize that I'm in a one-down type of a position. What can you consciously do, like in the spirit of collaboration and being an ally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I experienced something. This happened more than 20 years ago, but I'll tell you, it's still fresh in my mind. I was fraternizing with a group of colleagues after work hours at a job that I was on many, many years ago. And suddenly, one of the individuals started telling off colored cultural jokes. And so, in an effort to include me in the conversation, one colleague said to me, "Did you hear that? Wasn't that hysterical?" And I had such a sober look on my face. And suddenly she got it. It was like the light bulb went off. Carrie's not going to find this funny, because what I'm thinking is, okay, you're laughing at these other cultures now, but it's pretty quickly going to become a Black joke. And also just having a sensitivity around that. I don't laugh at cultural jokes because of my sensitivity,
Yeah.
being the person of color. And I saw her expression change, and she immediately turned to the other colleague. She and I were the only women. I should mention that as well, which added to the dynamics a little bit. And she turned to them and she said, "You know what, guys, this is inappropriate. Let's talk about something else.
Good for
Let's
her.
find something else
And
funny."
you, starting with you. But sometimes the tables will turn on you, and that you're not, getting the joke, or you don't have a sense of humor. But really, what you're doing is standing for what you believe in. And you're
Exactly.
standing up for who you believe in, which is all people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I want to get to these things that we can do, Terri, and then I also know you've got some great quotes to share with us. So, how do we remove our masks? You've mentioned a couple of these already, but just to look at the 4 C's.
Yeah. So courage, compassion, and connection. And I've got to attribute those to Brene Brown. They came directly out of, I believe, Daring Greatly.
Yes.
And I'm a big Brene Brown fan. But I added the fourth C, which is curiosity. And that's where we really encourage a sense of wonder about other people. And I want to add to, and I think this is sort of incorporated into the 4 C's, this notion of embracing both and thinking, as opposed to either or. It doesn't have to be your way or my way. It can be both. And I think if we're open minded and we leave the door open to the fact that there's room enough for respect for a different position, that is a position that is different from ours, even if I can't agree with you, I respect you, and therefore I respect where you are. So just a brief example of that, and I was sharing with you, Shannon, in the not too distant past, I shared I was doing a cross country flight, and I was bumped up to first class because I had a lot of points. And the plane was about to take off, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. I have no seatmate. I can take a nap. And at the last minute, this gentleman, a very loud and friendly Texan, sat down beside me and immediately started engaging me in a fulsome conversation. My first thought, being perfectly honest, is, oh boy, I was hoping to rest, and I don't want to talk. And it also occurred to me, I don't want to talk to this guy, because this guy and I don't have anything in common, right?
Yep.
Well, what I learned, because he was quite the talker, and obviously he felt comfortable with me, and what I learned very quickly was that he grew up in a rather he had a rather rigid upbringing, and that he had a sister 18 months apart. They grew up very close to one another, but she unfortunately, the family had turned their back on her because she'd made some life decisions that were very different than those that were endorsed by the parents. And he said, I feel really bad. I want to reach out to her and I miss her, but my dad won't speak to me if I do. because she's done some things. She's violated some of the core family uh, the way that we work, our operating procedures. And he said, I just really feel so conflicted about it. And so in thinking about that, and I did, I went into coaching mode and I offered him some advice. And so what I would say is resist your comfort zone, be willing to change, have those courageous conversations, listen with compassion, suspend judgment, and put yourself in the shoes of the other person, right? Empathize with them. Don't just sympathize, because he said repeatedly, I feel so sorry for, but empathize. And then finally, challenge your assumption about what's real, what's true for other people. And so the postscript on this, after our 5-hour flight, we exchanged business cards, and I heard from him a couple weeks later.
Remarkable.
And yeah. And he did have that courageous conversation, and he just wanted to thank me.
With his sister.
Yeah.
And was that the only time you heard from him?
I heard from him on 2 other occasions with regard to business stuff.
Yeah. But I just love that you were authentic with him. You took the mask off. You easily could have put the do not disturb sign on, but you engaged with him. You heard him. You didn't judge him beyond, your initial reaction. And even in the back here, it says don't judge the book by the cover, right?
Right.
So sometimes we do that. But you still gave him the benefit of the doubt, and you heard him, and then you heard this hurting, and you encouraged him. So, even in a situation that you would think there's no way I would break through to this person or that I would really engage with him, but you were willing to do that. And then I think this goes to a quote that you shared with me. I love this Dr. Maya Angelou quote.
Yes.
So she says, courage, the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently.
Absolutely.
How true.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about courage, we're talking about moral courage here. We're not talking about physical courage, running into a burning building and saving lives. But moral courage is actually tougher than is physical courage. And it doesn't mean that we always do the right thing, but it does mean that we strive to do the right things. We strive to do the right things. And it means that we're willing to operate in integrity. And in transparency. So a couple more quotes. Brene Brown, she says that you can choose to have comfort or you can choose courage, but you cannot have both. Think about that. You make a decision each day with each interaction to operate in integrity with courage or in comfort, but you cannot have both.
Yeah, I love that.
So why is it important to put our action to words? Because quite frankly, if you call yourself an ally, you've got to be willing to advocate for change. If you see or if you hear acts of discrimination, you must act. Martin Luther King once said, in the end, we will remember not the harm done by our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Isn't that deep?
Very. Yes. And the silence is violence.
Yes. You got it.
Yeah.
It's
so
violence.
If you're not willing to say anything, then you're a part of the problem.
Yeah. It's violence, it's complicity, all of that.
And the thought that that's what you will remember. That's the, you'll remember that the people who you thought had your back didn't. And that's hopefully a call to action for anyone who's triggered by that.
Yeah, because, frankly, Shannon, the events of the recent weeks and months have made it clear to all of us the magnitude of the social unrest, the injustice that's being perpetrated on a daily basis by the infrastructure of our government, by police, by generational privilege. So we know better. So we're admonished to do better. And Maya Angelou said that as well. When we know better, we do better.
That's right. Yeah, and she's saying, do the best you can. And then when you know better, do better. Your point exactly, right? Everybody's doing the best they can, but once we know, once the, purview has been expanded and you are having these courageous conversations and you're learning and you are becoming more aware of how privilege has happened and how your beliefs may be affecting you and what are some of the masks, like what you're speaking to us about tonight is a know better do better, right? Once you
Yeah.
know that you're deeply affected by your beliefs and your beliefs affect your thoughts and your thoughts affect your actions and that is your destiny, then you say, wait a second, I need to check in with my beliefs and why are we wearing the masks and how are we dealing with conflict. You've brought up a lot of really rich food for thought for us to engage with and understand more about. And so Edwige is here and she's saying thanking us for this conversation, thanking you for your wisdom. And we've got Carmen who's here with us and she's joining us this evening, and Nani, and we've got Tammy. So thank you all for joining us tonight and participating in this conversation. Terri, any last words? Any additional food for thought and encouragement for this group?
Well, I would just offer myself as a resource if
Yes.
individuals or organizations are working through these issues and they'd like to talk about the specifics of their organization or of their courageous challenge. I just want to offer myself as a resource,
Mm-hmm.
Career Intelligence Associates, and I'm
Yes.
more than glad to talk with you about that at greater length. And also, hopefully, we've whet your appetite for reading, and The Small Space Beyond Fear is available on Amazon.
Yes. Yes. And I'll put the
Yeah.
links to all of that in the posts and for sure the follow up notes that those who registered will be receiving. So thank you, Terri. Thanks for overcoming these technical challenges. I don't know if it has anything to do with the storm that we're experiencing or just,
It may well, but
things
I'm just
happen.
grateful that we were able to make it work. And Shannon, thank you for the invitation. As always, it's wonderful to be able to collaborate with you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Be well, be safe, and please do that introspection and reflection that Terri is encouraging us to do. All right. We'll see you next Wednesday. Good night.
Have a good evening.